All right, here we go, everybody. Welcome to the 31st episode of Dear Dr. Fantasy, and my special guest for today is none other than Josh from Red Fury Books. Hello, Josh. It's great to see you.
Hey, Philip. Great to see you again.
Yeah, this is actually our second time chatting together, I believe, right? We had the chat on Matt's channel, Matt on Books, where
Actually, third,
it's
because we
our
did
third.
we did the Malazan on Alex's channel
Oh,
too.
of course we did.
That
Yeah, how could I
kickoff.
forget that? It is our third.
Yep.
Yes, yes, that was a lot of fun. With
Yeah.
mostly me blabbing the whole time, but
Well, that's what we wanted. We wanted you to sell people on the series. So
well, it's a dangerous thing if you start asking me to talk about Malazan. So,
sure.
and I know you know that feeling with certain series as well. And we are going to be talking about those big time. But I'm going to be curious to hear your Malazan thoughts for sure when you get going. I know you're starting Malazan this month, right?
I'm literally starting Gardens of the Moon today.
Whoa! All right.
Yeah.
I feel like this is an auspicious meeting then. So.
Yeah, perfect timing, really.
And it's kind of neat because I'm not completely new to Realm of the Elderlings, but I know it is a series that is your like favorite of all time, right? I mean, that's fair, right?
It's one or two. I
Okay.
still haven't decided if it's bumped Lord of the Rings off of that perch, but
Oh, okay.
it's
Yeah.
I mean, it's a coin flip right now. I'm going to make a video later this year, my top 10 book series. So at that point, I'll have to come to
You'll
a
have to
firm decision.
commit. You'll have to
But
commit.
as of now,
Ooh.
it's like 1 and 1A, and it depends on my mood which one's number one, really.
Okay. Okay. Well, I completely sympathize with that dilemma. uh, for me, I have only read the first two trilogies, but as you are starting Malazan, I am now back into Realm of the Elderlings. I've just started, actually not today, but a couple days ago, the first book in the Tawny Man trilogy. So yeah, Fool's Errand. I also have to think, which fool is this now? Because
Yeah.
there are so many fools in the Realm of the Elderlings, in the titles, I mean.
Yeah, it's almost like you could do a random generator, a full assassin, errand, quest, or whatever, and you come
Yeah,
up with a Robin Hobb title. But
yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's exciting. I love the Fool's Errand. The first 200 pages of that book is so memorable to me, so
Yeah.
masterful, because it just, for me, it shows how Hobb can take a plot that goes nowhere and make it some of the most riveting literature you'll ever read. Just incredible.
I am already feeling like a just a really cozy immersion in the book, and I'm not that far along yet, but without any spoilers, of course, it was so wonderful. After it's been years since I read Farseer, and just the opener to Fool's Errand had me feeling such nostalgia
Yeah.
that it was just almost, it was beautiful. I just felt like, now I'm going to love this book.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
just, it's a wonderful opening, and to have these reminders of characters that I knew years ago. And it's almost appropriate because there's been a few years in between
Time gap. Yeah.
time gap. So actually, I mean, I didn't plan it, but it's kind of working out well because I feel like I'm like the character who's narrating in a way,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
having these reminders of things that happened in the opening trilogy. So it's really wonderful to be back in the realm of the Elderlings, and I'm so looking forward to finishing this series that will happen this year. And I anticipate that it's going to be a struggle for me if I ever do make another top 10 video. So Hobb is already at number 3.
Yeah.
So, and does it get better? Josh, does Realm of the Elderlings
I
get better after Live Ship
it's
Trader?
I think it does. I mean, I think
Ooh.
of the five, for me, I have Live Ship as third best out of the five. I
Oh,
think Fits in the Fool was the best trilogy. I think Tawny Man was number two, and Live Ship. Now that's fine line because all three of those are truly masterful. But
yeah.
I have Live Ship third of the five. Just for me, just shows
Wow.
how incredible the entire scope of the series is.
Yeah, I'm gonna have a real problem. So,
It's a good problem to have, really.
yeah, I mean, and these things are somewhat artificial, really. All these top 10 things.
Yeah,
It's honestly a little silly, but it's fun to try to rank these things, and it's nerve-wracking too, because I know for me it was Tolkien, like you were talking about a moment ago. I never thought anything could ever possibly unseat Tolkien, especially Lord of the Rings. I
yeah,
love Silmarillion, I love The Hobbit, and I've even read quite a lot of the other stuff. But for me, it was always really Lord of the Rings was
same.
the sweet spot, if you will, because
Yeah,
I always felt that the Hobbit, as dear as it is to me, it's not as serious in presentation by design. It was
agreed. Yeah,
a totally different level of writing. Whereas the Silmarillion, I love the epicness, I love the mythology, I love it all, but it does lack a certain human element. A certain, I think the characters are remote in the Silmarillion.
yeah, yeah,
As cool as they are, I don't feel their humanity as much as I do with the characters in Lord of the Rings, especially the hobbits, who really are that injection of humanity into this mythic world. So, but anyway, I thought nothing could ever unseat Tolkien for me, and then
yeah.
Malazan happened.
Well, that's
So
why I'm looking forward to that as well, because I know just watching one of the collaboration videos all of you did at one point,
mhm.
um, I saw Jimmy talking about how
Mm,
he finished Realm of the Elderlings and Malazan around the same time, and just
yeah,
talked about how both of them will just touched him in very different ways. And I'm
yeah,
looking forward to that, because Hobb, it's obviously through character, and Malazan, it's a bit more through world. And that's, for me, that's one of the things I love most about Lord of the Rings.
yeah.
I've read Lord of the Rings 4 times in my life,
Okay.
and each time I appreciated different things, and I love different things about it. And the last time I read it, which was about 5 or 6 years ago, the richness of the world is what really struck me.
Mm,
And that's, for me, has been the reason that it's always been at the top. It's just felt so vibrant and so alive.
yeah,
And that's not to say it doesn't have great characters. Until
yeah,
Fitzchivalry Farseer, Samwise Gamgee was probably my favorite literary character I'd ever read.
yeah.
So it has everything. But it was interesting to me through the scope of me reading this for the first time when I was 12, and then reading it just periodically over the last 30 years or so, how it just hits a little differently each time.
Yeah, yeah. I used to read it every year.
Wow.
So yeah, I was crazy. I used to read it every year. I haven't read it actually in a few years, but because I'm
Yeah.
trying to read other fantasy.
Yeah, sure.
But I will do a Lord of the Rings reread, and I will do it for the channel at some point. And I'm very much looking forward to that.
Yeah.
And it is just it's in my DNA.
Yeah.
It's just a huge part of, honestly, my a lot of life choices are because of Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Probably the reason I am a scholar of Old English is because of Tolkien, and probably the reason I'm an aspiring writer is because of Tolkien. So yeah, it's just impossible to describe just how much of my life is a result of reading that story. But yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's why it was amazing for me for Malazan to come along, and the slight edge that it has for me over Lord of the Rings is really mostly an accident of time. The fact is, I think Lord of the Rings is, for many of us, it's what fantasy has been. It is a defining work of the genre. Whereas I feel like Malazan is pointing the way forward in some ways. It is telling us what fantasy can be,
Yeah.
and both are extremely valuable and wonderful. But I'm excited for the future of the genre too, and so Malazan has that extra edge, and from that perspective for me. So, but I don't know what's going to happen when I finish Realm of the Elderlings. How am I going to juggle the top three? I don't know.
It's, yeah, like you said, it's listing things. It's artificial.
Yeah.
because I'm a musician by trade, and yes, I
Yes.
have my favorite composers, but can you really say of the absolute best composers that one is better than another?
Well, it's Bach, of course.
Well, I guess if you had to choose one, it would be Bach, but you can analyze different aspects of theirs. Mozart might have been better at melody than Beethoven, but Beethoven was better at harmony than Mozart. And you can compare things that way, but ranking is artificial. But for me, the thing I've always liked about ranking, because amongst my musician friends, we would do the things like, okay, rank the top 9 Beethoven symphony, or your top 3 of the 9 Beethoven symphonies, and it can spur discussion. And
Well,
I think that's
the
why
ninth is definitely my favorite.
but yeah, I agree. But there are people that would put different ones up there. They'd be
Yeah,
wrong, of course, but
parts
um,
of the seventh I love, and the fifth. So yeah, that's tough. Of course, my Vivaldi would be number 2 on my list after Bach. But
so you like
I
Baroque.
like the Baroque. Yeah, I like the Baroque. You
Yeah.
can tell, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I like old stuff, Josh. That's me.
Yeah.
But if you don't mind the sidetrack, because I've always wanted to ask you about this.
Sure.
What musician? I know you've talked about it before, and I think I know the answer, but I'd love to hear you talk about it a little bit. What instruments you play, how you got into music, and if it has any relationship at all with your reading life too. Maybe you could talk about that.
Well, kind of does a little bit. My first instrument was piano,
Okay.
and playing the piano and learning how to read were two things that happened before my conscious memory. So pretty much my whole life I've been able to read, and I've been able to play piano. I don't know how old I was. I think I was 3 or 4 for both of them. And I started playing piano because after my parents' divorce, we moved in with my grandparents for a little bit.
Okay.
And my grandmother played piano, and I would just sit next to her. And then at one point, I started playing, and I don't remember any of this. I just remember that I've always just kind of played, and I've always been able to read music and all of that. And kind of same thing with reading. My mother always read to me every night, and at some point, I guess one day she was really tired and she was skipping lines, and I was calling her on it. And so she
Oh,
thought that I had memorized whatever it was reading. So she brought out a different book, and it turns out I just learned how to read by watching her read to me every night. I don't
wow.
remember any of this. This is very, very young Josh.
Yeah.
So I guess both of those things became part of me as an individual at a very young age, because it was something that was just part of, who I am.
Yeah.
But as far as my music journey, my grandfather was a high school band director, and
Aha.
he was a
Okay.
very good trumpet player. So when it came to 6th grade and had the choice of joining the middle school band, they gave me a little sheet to write down, what are your 3 choices for instrument? And I wrote trumpet, 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 because I was going to play what grandpa was going to play.
Yep.
So I became a trumpet player, and I was a trumpet major in college.
Wow.
As far as other instruments, I play string bass quite a bit, just because I do
Oh,
teach orchestra.
okay.
And
Wow.
so I'm teaching string players every day. We do full orchestra combined with our members of the band, periodic times of the year, but I'm teaching string players all the time. So when I started teaching strings, I didn't know much about the bass. So I just started teaching myself. And
Wow.
immediately what I did, the school I was at, I had a colleague who's actually to this day still my best friend, that was the band director. And I just started sitting in with his jazz band, and I'd always been a jazz trumpet player too. So it was just a lot of fun to play bass in jazz band too.
Oh,
So
I would love playing bass in a jazz
it
band.
was, it was a lot of fun. So I'd say those are the 3 instruments I play most, but I could get a pretty good sound on just about anything, because when you get a degree in music education, you have to learn the fundamentals well enough to be able to teach it.
Yeah.
Now,
Wow.
I would not play probably those 3 instruments, plus maybe percussion would be the extent of what I'd be willing to play in public.
Okay. Okay.
The others I could play, I could make a sound if I were helping out with like a beginner band or a beginner orchestra. I'd feel comfortable at that level helping out. But beyond that, probably those are the 4 instruments that I would feel comfortable playing, for others in public.
Yeah. I feel like you probably could grasp a cello pretty quickly since you know a bass.
Yeah, for sure.
I think the strings are the same, right?
No, the bass is the one that's different.
Okay.
The bass actually has the same as the strings of the violin, but they're inverted. The
Oh,
lowest string
okay.
and the
Yeah, because
highest
cello
string
is
are different.
C, G, D, A.
Yeah, so that's cello, and the cello and the viola have the same strings.
Yes, viola does. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So, but yeah, the bass is quite different, and that's one of the reasons. Other reasons I wanted to play it. It was so different. I had actually, when I decided that I didn't want to be a band director, but I wanted to be an orchestra director, I started taking violin lessons,
Ah,
and the professor, did a great job, and he knew that I wasn't trying to be a performer. It was more all about learning the technique so I could teach it and understanding it.
right.
And there's a lot of parallels between violin and viola, and then
Oh, yeah.
enough parallels between viola and cello that I grasped it, but the bass was so different.
Okay.
So that's one
Ah,
of the other reasons I wanted to play it. But it's also, I mean, it's just a lot of fun, and it's one of the more versatile string instruments because you can
ah.
play in a jazz band, you could play a musical, you could play a lot of different things. So it was just a fun thing to pick up, in my early to mid 20s and start playing it.
Wow, so cool. Yeah, I can relate to parts of that story. I'm not an accomplished musician whatsoever. I did play trumpet when I was a kid. I was not very
Yeah.
good because I didn't practice. Played some guitar, dabbled a bit here and there, but my daughters are both cellists. The older one, actually pretty accomplished cellist. She went to the Juilliard pre-college program. And so,
Wow.
yeah, she was good enough to get into that. And I had to drive into Manhattan every Saturday. And she spent every Saturday through her last 3 years of high school all day. I mean, it was like early morning. I would drive into Manhattan. It was kind of cool because there are very few times when you can just drive straight from the Lincoln Tunnel all the way up to Lincoln Center, going through just green light after green light, because there's nobody there early on a Saturday morning.
Yeah.
I would do that every Saturday, and she would spend the entire day there until the late at night as part of that program.
Wow.
So I have a very special affinity for the cello myself
Yeah.
because of my daughters, and a tiny bit of knowledge, about strings. Because when my younger daughter started to learn, I kind of taught her for the first few months. I helped. She had a teacher, a real teacher.
Sure.
I was helping, and I could play, very rudimentary things uh,
Yeah.
on the cello, but it was not long before she was better as a 4-year-old than I was. So,
Yeah.
so, but yeah, I just love music, and I have so much respect and envy a little bit too for people like you who have put in that time and that dedication to get so great at an instrument, and in your case, instruments. So cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, well, back to books, I guess. You are starting Malazan, and do you
Yeah.
have any questions while we're together? Anything that you would want to know, or anything you're anticipating, wondering about?
I think I've done a lot of prep. I watched a lot of the spoiler-free content that you and AP, probably the two channels I've watched most. Matt on Books had a great kind of primer video a couple months ago that
Yeah.
helped as well. And the one thing I'm already enjoying, even though I haven't started yet, we have on the Grimoire Discord, we have a read along going. So there's a lot of people in there. But it's not just a lot of people that are newbies like me. It's people like Matt and others who have read the series that are
Yes.
there to just kind of lend support and, help those of us that might be getting confused. But
Those are
I know,
Malazan readers for you. Yeah.
yeah, it's just, it seems really, I was surprised to see so many just people in there that have already read it that are just excited to
Oh yeah.
see all of us experience it. And I know the four of us, we have our own little group chat that we talk about things. I know we're all really excited, and we're all kind of getting started right now. So
Yeah.
it's going to be just a lot of fun. I think part of it that's going to be meaningful for me is just the shared experience. I know that especially a series like this that is pretty much notoriously challenging. I
Hmm.
think having the people to have the discussions with is going to be just paramount to help through it. But I'm trying to enter in it without too much, I don't know, too much expectation as to
Hmm.
just, I think you said at one point, like, go with the flow.
Yeah, yeah. Try
But
to. Right,
just
yeah.
kind of go in and just know that I'm going to experience something that's different. And that's exciting to me, because I think one of the things that for me as a, just as a human being, I love to learn. And one of
Hmm.
the things I love to do is experience new things. So in literature, that's why a lot of times I read a lot of different genres, is to
Yeah.
experience different things. But experiencing something within what is my favorite genre, it's pretty exciting to me. So
Yeah.
I'm really excited to go in and just see what this is all about, because the thing that draws me in most is, like yourself, the people that get through Malazan and they finish Malazan. It seems like the praise is universal. And it's not like, oh, that was really good. It was like, that was the best thing I've ever read in my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so many
Yeah.
people say The Crippled God is their favorite book of all time. I mean, there's just,
That's me. Yeah.
and I want to find out what it's all about. And when I see so many people enjoying it, there's obviously something fundamentally great about it. So
Yeah.
I'm just trying to go in open-minded and see what I think.
Cool. That is a great, I think, perfect approach. And I think you'll have a good experience with that attitude. And the idea that you embrace challenges means you're, I think, perfect for reading the series, because Erickson and Esselmont as well, if you ever get to Esselmont's books, both of them do a fair amount of trope subversion and inversion, and they are just doing, it's fantasy, but they do their own thing, and they do things that you tend to see in literature more than in fantasy specifically. So it will be something different and fresh for you in that sense. So that is
Yeah,
so
it sounds
cool.
right up my alley. Yeah.
But before you got to Realm of the Elderlings and now Malazan, you read a few other things, I'm sure. So, let's get a sense. I think it's time for our standard question. And going on the premise that you are what you read, what brought Josh to the point of becoming a Realm of the Elderlings and Malazan reader? What are some of the formative reads from going all the way back to your childhood that you consider to be part of who you are, that explain, your journey as a reader, and perhaps why you also decided to turn on the camera and become a booktuber? So let's go back to little Josh first, though.
So um, I did read a lot in elementary. I mentioned I was on one of Joanna's Why Read episodes.
Yes.
And for me, the answer to that question, one of the things for me is that when I got to kindergarten, and I guess this isn't common now, but back then, kindergarten was when you learn to read. I think now most kids already read when they get to kindergarten, but
A lot do.
when I got there, I knew how to read already, and I was the only one that could read already. So
Ah,
starting at that age, I went and I read with the first graders when it was reading time. And I did that all throughout elementary school. So it was almost like reading was kind of a little source of pride for me as a
uh-huh.
young kid, because I was good at it. And we all know we tend to enjoy things that we're good at.
Yep.
So that was something that early on was, I guess, something that made me a reader from a very early age, because it was something that I was good at. Additionally, just from personal life, I'm an only child, so I don't
Uh-huh.
have siblings. And I remember a quote from I think it was a Jeff Vandermeer book, where he said that only children are the masters of finding things to do in solitude. That's a
Yeah.
paraphrase. And
Yeah.
it's true.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite things to do was read. And so I read voraciously. One of the fundamental reads for me in elementary school, and I see how that was kind of a root of, or a seeds planted for my future life, is I read every single one of Franklin W. Dixon's Hardy Boy mysteries.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I mean, there were like 40 or something like of those. I mean, there were a lot of those, and I had all of those in my elementary school library, and I would just check them off and read through the whole series. It wasn't until I got close to the end that I realized that there were kind of only 4 different kinds of plots. It was the same story recycled over and over, but I was, a third or fourth grader at the time. But
Yeah,
I think my love of book series started there.
that's a
With
series.
those. Yeah. And then I still love mysteries and thrillers, but sixth grade, I think, was a big turning point in my reading. When I got to middle school, go to the middle school library, and all of a sudden there's new books that I've never seen before that weren't in my elementary school library.
Ooh.
And I remember very clearly, I saw on the shelf the cover of The Book of Three by Lloyd Alexander.
Oh, yay. Yeah.
And
My
it was the
first
old
fantasy.
one with the antler, the figure,
Yep.
like the skeletal head with the antler ears. And I just saw that and I said, oh, that looks amazing. And I picked that up and I read those 5 books really quickly. And I loved Pride Day. And I actually reread them last year and they hold up. They're fantastic.
I
But
saw that you were rereading those. Yeah.
that
Yeah.
was a lot of fun. I mean, they are middle grade,
Yeah.
but they do progress and get better. I would even say the 4th one is somewhat existential.
Wow.
But anyway,
Okay.
the
Yeah.
Prydain was my first step into the fantasy genre. And then I asked the librarian, what should I read next? And she handed me The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Oh,
So
nice.
I read Narnia next. And I didn't like Narnia as much as I did Book of Prydain Chronicles.
Yeah.
Um,
I was the same.
I'm rereading that this year just to see. I'm actually rereading it side by side with Malazan just to provide some
Oh, that's
extreme contrast. Yeah.
very smart. Yeah.
But
That is very extreme. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. So as soon as I finish, Gardens of the Moon, Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe is my next book.
Okay, cool.
But after Narnia, this is still my 6th grade year. It was an important year for my reading. Finished Narnia, and I asked the librarian, I said, well, I like this one a little bit better than this one. She said, she handed me The Hobbit next.
Ah,
And I read The Hobbit and then The Lord of the Rings, which from that point forward was my favorite book series. Maybe still is. I'm not sure.
this librarian is a very important person in your life.
She really was. And that started me reading a lot of fantasy. And that's pretty much
Yeah.
90% of what I read in middle school and high school. So I read a lot of the typical 80s type of fantasy, a lot of David Eddings,
Uh-huh.
read some Forgotten Realms, some Dragonlance, loved those. Terry Brooks, of course. Raymond E. Feist, who I'm rereading a little bit of this year, but a lot of those typical things. I did a little bit of sci-fi, but mostly fantasy
Okay.
through
So
high
high
school.
school Josh was big into fantasy.
Big time. And it was great. I had a lot of friends that we read the same sorts of things, so we could talk about them and
Cool.
recommend different books to each other. And it was just a lot of fun to
Did you play
experience
D&D
that.
as well?
I did. We
Yeah.
did. I think I
Okay.
started sometimes in middle school and played throughout high school.
Okay. Your high school sounds very similar to mine in some way. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was, I mean, it was good. And that was my favorite stuff. I also started reading, just thinking about the books that shaped me. In around 8th or 9th grade, my grandmother, the piano player, was also a big reader. And she handed me Thinner, which is a Stephen King book that was written by Richard Bachman, his pseudonym.
Right, right.
And it was my first Stephen King book. And I
Okay.
started reading Stephen King and started loving him as an author as well.
He's a favorite of yours too, I believe.
Yes, he's actually, it's the same question. I don't know if it's Hobb or King. It's
Yeah.
been King since high school, but Hobb has inserted herself into that discussion. So
And then there's that pesky Tolkien. So yeah.
yeah. So yeah, it's a good problem to have. Which author's greater,
Yeah.
I mean, I think in life we hope as readers we discover, because we know there are great authors out there that
Yeah.
do everything that we want and value as readers. I just hope to discover as many of them as I can.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that finally last year, I finally discovered Robin Hobb, because life-changing author for me.
Yeah.
But
Sure. Yeah.
let's see. So through high school, I read fantasy, and then
And King, we
college,
got to King there.
I
Yeah.
got to King, but then college, most of the reading I was doing was for college.
Okay.
But in the
Wow.
summers, I didn't read much fantasy, but I read a lot of Stephen King.
Okay.
I seem to recall very clearly one summer break picking up The Stand, and that was one of my favorite, well, still is one of my favorite books of all time. Um, and I think at that point in college, that's when King solidified himself as my favorite author.
Okay.
And so I did bachelor's and master's back to back. So same deal during my master's, especially a lot of reading for my degree.
Yeah.
So I
Which is
only
music
really
education, right? Is that
actually my master's is in performance.
performance?
It's
Okay.
actually in instrumental conducting. So I was a
Ah,
conducting student in my master's. So doing a lot of reading there, didn't leave a lot of time for leisure reading throughout any of my music school experience.
yeah.
So finally, when I hit the job force, I had time for leisure reading. But what's interesting to me looking back is that I think I just wanted to stretch myself, and I didn't go back to fantasy.
Okay.
I started reading a lot of other kinds of things. I read quite a bit of nonfiction. I read a bit of philosophy, because
Yeah.
you're in your mid-20s, you're trying to understand the world and how you fit into it and what you believe as an individual. So I read a lot
Yeah.
of philosophy.
Yeah.
I read a good amount of, as far as fiction's concerned, I started reading classics voraciously. And
Mm-hmm.
I had a streak there where I swear every other thing I was reading was a classic. So I feel pretty well read in a lot of the classics. And
Yeah.
I did that for several years. Discovered crime fiction, which in many ways harkened back to my Hardy Boys, because a lot of the murder mysteries
Yeah.
are mysteries. And that's kind of what I did, is I just kind of dabbled here and there. I was still reading a lot. I mean, not as much as I read now, but I was still probably reading 40 to 50 books a year.
That's a lot.
And
Yeah.
but not really much fantasy. And probably between, let's see, like 2000, roughly 2000 and maybe 2018, the only new fantasy I read was A Song of Ice and Fire and Harry Potter.
Okay.
And that's all I read new of that genre in that span. I did a lot of rereads. I reread Tolkien like 3 times in that stretch. I reread The Belgariad several times. I reread Rift War at one point. I reread Sword of Shannara. I reread a lot of the old stuff.
So you
But I
weren't
did
entirely out of touch with fantasy then. Yeah.
totally, yeah, totally. But I had a friend that was constantly bugging me to read The Wheel of Time.
Mm.
Constantly bugging me. And it took 10 years, but I found I had the time when pandemic hit.
Wait, 10 years for you to be convinced or 10 years for you to read Wheel of
No,
Time?
10 years, 10 years to finally be convinced.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, he kept telling me, "Oh, this is going to be great for you. It's like one foot in old school fantasy, but it'll kind of help you catch
True.
up to newer types of
That's
storytelling."
actually really true. Yeah.
And yeah, he was right, but I didn't read it until pandemic hit, and it was 2019.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And
That's pretty
I,
recent then. Yeah.
yeah, it was 2019 where, for me, what I call is the spring break that never ended. We went on spring break, and then
Same here.
I didn't go back to school, well, technically back to school, until August.
Yeah.
And even at that point, things were very virtual. So my job, which was normally, I would say my typical work week is probably about 60 hours, was suddenly a 40-hour work week. I had all this extra time to do a lot of reading. But
Wow.
it was the Wheel of Time that brought me back to fantasy.
Wheel of Time. All right.
It
Wow.
really was. And I liked especially the first book, because it felt just like Tolkien, but there was just a little bit difference there. Slightly harder magic system, a little bit more focus on character, but it still had all of the same feelings. It started as the typical small fellowship, and just as they explore the world, we explore the world, that kind of storytelling. But I read,
I mean, The Eye of the World is actually a pretty deliberate imitation of Tolkien, but
oh yes,
Jordan goes in his own direction entirely, and there are hints of that even at the end of Eye of the World. But it starts out as, and that's understandable. Everybody was trying to be the next Tolkien through the entire, 70s and 80s. So, and that was just, I think almost that if you wanted to, and I know Jordan had written some Conan books and stuff before, so he wasn't exactly a new writer or anything, but I think it was his first, big splash as a writer was going to be this. So he had to start out with a Tolkien homage, I guess. But yeah.
Well, I was Mike had a video a couple years ago about, it was kind of it was about Terry Brooks.
Oh, Shannara is even more of a,
yeah,
I think imitation of Lord of the Rings. Yeah.
But the one thing he said that I think is so true,
short of Shannara, anyway, the first book, not
yeah. But the one thing he said that really stuck with me in that is these authors wanted to get published.
Yep.
And at the time, publishers were only publishing things that they were safe, that they knew were going to sell. So things that were like Tolkien, but Brooks as well. I mean, both of them kind of went their own way. I loved the Elfstones of Shannara. When I reread those, that was by far my favorite of those books. And it did go a different direction. And obviously Jordan did as well. And so that's really what brought me back. That's what, because again, I had more time on my hands. I had more time to read. And that's actually when I discovered Booktube. And the first channel I discovered, and because I don't know how all of this works, but I was on YouTube. I didn't follow anybody that did book reviews. And on one of those, it gives you a little tab of things maybe you should watch. And it was a thumbnail of Mike, Eye of the World.
So Mike,
so I think my computer saw that I had bought Eye of the World from Amazon and figured I should check out a YouTube video. I don't know how all that works, but so I started watching Mike's videos. So he was the first channel I followed, and probably the only one I followed for a while, until he had mentioned, it's funny because, and that's why even when I'm a small booktuber, I always mention the big channels, because I discovered Daniel Green's channel through Mike's channel.
You're the first person actually who has said anyone other than Daniel Green or Murphy was usually they're the entrance into fantasy booktube, because of, they're big, and the algorithm or whatever tends to present their videos to people. I think Daniel Green was the first I saw when I thought I was going to be clever and start a booktube channel on fantasy, or I didn't know what booktube was. I was going to start a YouTube channel on fantasy because no one else had ever done anything like that. Right.
Yeah. And
I typed in something like, fantasy books or whatever, and Daniel Green pops up, and I was like, oh, okay, somebody's doing this.
But I actually discovered him through Mike's channel.
So you're the first I've ever heard say that. Yeah,
because Mike had just mentioned, he was in one of his reviews, he just said something like, this won't be, he's always very humble about what he does. He just said, this won't be the best review. You want the best Wheel of Time content, go check out Daniel Green. And I'm like, who's Daniel Green?
Interesting.
So I just discovered him, and then probably Murphy after that, because I know they collaborate. And then now I follow like 200 booktubers. You know how that works.
Here. I am actually subscribed to like 200 booktubers, and I don't have anywhere near the time that would be required to actually watch all their videos.
Sure. It's tough.
And some of them don't even probably know that I'm subscribed to them, but but that's another nice problem, I suppose, is the wealth of this community and how many people are just passionate, and
it is.
So that's a great story of you, and thank you to your friend for getting you back into fantasy. We love having you around here. And I think that, though, it's so common what you were describing. A lot of my guests, the vast majority of my guests, have a similar pattern to what you just described, where probably mostly through high school they were really into fantasy, and then suddenly in college, boom, it disappears, and then something happens later in life to get them back into it. That's a very common pattern, what you just described, for various reasons. Like you, weirdly, I was doing a grad school for me was where I wasn't reading for pleasure for several years. I was reading some fantasy because I did my dissertation on William Morris, but it was a different thing when you're reading for your dissertation versus reading for pleasure. So I realized at one point, I'm not reading for pleasure, and I need to, and I made a promise to myself, I will read every day something that I just want to read for fun. And so
Yes.
I've been able to pretty much keep that promise. But it's a common pattern, really,
Yeah.
people to do that, and then to come back later and realize there's so much to get out of fantasy. But I do think that it's a good thing too that you expanded your reading to include all these different genres and nonfiction as well, and all these things which really do inform you as a reader, and as somebody who analyzes literature. You're all that much richer for having read all that stuff as you read fantasy. You know, it definitely,
I think so.
Yeah.
I think especially embarking upon Malazan. Initially,
Sure.
I was a little intimidated, but then I thought about it and I said, you know, I read Dostoevsky for fun.
Yeah. I mean, that,
And
yeah.
I mean, that's not a common thing. And
Right.
I know a lot of times you've mentioned short stories, how if you're a short story reader, and that can benefit you reading in. And I just thought about it because the one thing I've always thought about when people ask me about like my Booktube channel, like, what do you think you provide? For me, I think breadth is
Yeah.
what I can provide most. I don't think I have the depth in any of the specific genres that a lot of channels do, whether they focus on fantasy or they focus on literary fiction or whatever. But I think my breadth is pretty expansive, that I've read a lot of different kinds of things. And I think that's one reason that I hope we'll see, starting today again. I think that will help me in my Malazan journey.
Yeah. Well, I would say it might sound counterintuitive, but the breadth can also be conducive to the depth. You know, having read outside of fantasy can enable you to gain insights into that go deeper, you know, as you read fantasy as well. So I think they go hand in hand, and so I'm sure that you're gonna to have so many things you're going to pick up on in Malazan, and I'm looking forward to your reactions, because I'm sure I'm going to learn some stuff as you read and think about the experience. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say, along with Jordan and Alex and Ian. That's the four of you, right?
Yep.
Who are in this read together.
It is.
Yeah. Along with, I'm sure, a lot of people on the Discord as well.
Yeah, there's quite a bit, and it's that's been fun too, because they're just as enthusiastic about it as we are, and
Cool.
we're looking forward to every book we finish. We're going to do a live stream. We're bringing a different Malazan vet,
Yeah.
and just to talk through the book and have them maybe allay some of our fears or illuminate some of our missed things the things we missed along the way. But yeah, it's
What's
gonna be
the
a lot of
schedule
fun.
for that? When is your first talk going to be on Gardens of the Moon?
It's mid-February
Okay.
is when we have that. We just set a date for that, so we're definitely looking forward to that. And we're going to read the first two books January, February. And
Oh,
then
okay.
after that, what we'll probably do is we might alternate months after that.
Yeah.
Because I don't think we want to be in a hurry with it, but I don't think we want to spread it out over 5 years either. So but yeah, I think that's kind of our schedule. We said we'd read the first two kind of back to back, and then maybe reevaluate at that point.
Okay. And you're going to alternate hosting the discussions? Is that
Yeah,
how
I think so. We'll probably have the first one on Alex's channel because he has the biggest channel, and then we'll probably go from there.
Okay. And Alex's channel is Tall Guy Reads.
Tall Guy Reads, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. And yours is, of course, Red Fury Books. And Ian's is Ian the Reader, I think.
Ian the Reader.
Yeah. And Jordan is
Jordan Reads.
Reads. Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, that's so cool. I just going to be very interested in you guys, your experience, and I'm sure it's going to be a tremendous journey. So,
Yeah,
what else?
excited.
Yeah, yeah. What else are you up to though on your channel? You just did your year-end award video recently, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I got to
Yeah.
don the tuxedo, which
That is a
is not
nice tuxedo. Yeah.
well, as a musician, you of course, I've owned a
Oh, it's
tuxedo since
beautiful.
I've been 18 years old, but
Yeah.
yeah, the putting on the tuxedo and the green screen and all of that. Yeah, the Red Fury Book Awards was a lot of fun to put together.
Yeah.
Easily the most time consuming video of the year. Most of my videos, it's the talking head model. Turn on the camera, bloviate about a book for 10 minutes, and then upload.
Yeah.
But that one I had some guests do some voiceovers, and I did quite a bit of editing in it as well. And I'm
Yeah.
not great at that, but I think it came out okay. And
Yeah.
but it was a lot of fun. But yeah, as for the channel, the one thing I'm going to do this year is I'm going to be doing a lot of my top 10 favorite things.
Okay.
So top 10 authors, including places to start for the authors, and top 10 book series, and then top 10 books. I'll do a top 10 total, but I'll probably do top 10 of each genre as well,
Okay.
because
Yeah.
I feel that I want to be able to give my favorite kind of videos. For me, are the books, the videos where I can talk about a lot of different books and give a lot of recommendations.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons I wanted to do those top tens. And the other thing I love most is I love the chat in the comments section. And it seems
Yeah.
like if you rank something, it
Oh,
always
people like
sparks,
to comment. Yeah. Yeah.
whether they like your ranking or not. It was funny. I did a ranking of all of Joe Abercrombie's books a couple months ago, and I still get comments from here and there. And someone commented just the other day, and his order was totally different than mine. And I said, thanks for your order. We're both right. And it's
Yeah.
true. I mean, it's
Yeah.
art, it's subjective, but it was just very interesting that my favorite Abercrombie book was his least favorite.
Interesting.
So,
Can you
it,
give a spoiler there? What, or do you want to not
Trouble
spoil?
with Peace.
Trouble with Peace was your favorite,
Yes.
and that was
Yeah.
his least favorite. Okay,
Yes.
interesting. That would be. I can see it being a favorite. I can't
Yeah.
understand why that would be a least favorite, but
To each his own.
yeah,
It's just,
maybe he's one of those readers that really wanted to see more of the old characters from the original trilogy, because I know that some
perhaps.
people, I've heard even like Mike, I think there's a piece of Mike that I think he wanted more of those beloved characters,
Yeah.
and to be introduced to these new ones. There's an adjustment getting to know these new people. We're all introverts around here, right? We take time to get to know people.
Yep.
No, we love our familiarity, right?
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, Logan Nine Fingers and Glockta,
Yeah. I
two of the
mean,
best literary creations ever. Of course, we want more of them.
yeah, yeah. And I will admit myself to feeling some disappointment picking up a first law book and realizing, oh, there's no Logan in here.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, I agree.
yeah.
I love those kinds of videos that just spur discussion. And as my channel was growing, that was a couple times I had that conversation with just whoever watched the video. What kind of videos do you like that cause you to comment? Because I
Yeah.
really don't, it doesn't matter to me the views or the likes or even the subscribe. It's the comments section for me is the most
Oh,
fun.
it's where the life is. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that. So I've just seen that people like to talk when you rank things. So we'll do a
It's
whole
true.
bunch of top tens next year just because of that. And
Yeah.
the other byproduct, I'm sure you see it all the time, is I love it when I do a book review and then someone comes back weeks or months later and says, I read this book because of you and I loved it.
Yes.
I mean,
Oh
that's
my
just one of the
goodness.
coolest moments. I
That's
did.
the
I'm so
best.
happy right now on the Grimoire. They're reading Shogun, and I read Shogun in January and did a video
Yeah.
in January of last year. And the individual book reviews don't get a lot of views, but
Yeah.
over time they do. And it's just been really cool how over time people found that video and they've commented, I'm going to go read it now. And then they'll pop back weeks later and say, I read it. I
Yeah.
loved it. Thank you for the video. And
I think I actually watched that video of yours.
yeah, that was about a year ago.
Yeah.
And I love that book. And it's really cool now because a lot of people are reading it.
Yeah.
Just being able to be just like the Malazan chat where the vets pop in to be a Shogun vet and just pop in and
Yeah.
see what they're talking about, whether they're confused by all of the Japanese dialogue that is untranslated or whatever else is going on. It's just fun to witness people reading a book that you love so much.
It is. That is part of the joy of this is, and I can see when other people are, when I'm starting a series and, you know, people are coming in and they're fans of that series, it's almost like they're reliving, or when you're the veteran, you're reliving the experience through someone else,
Yeah.
which is part of what we're doing in this community. I think we're
Yeah.
sort of vicariously re-experiencing that book by hearing other people talk about it, because I enjoy hearing reviews of books that obviously I've already read and hearing, oh yeah, that part, and there's just a piece of you that relives that book while you're hearing that review. That's part of the experience, right?
Oh, exactly. And I always love watching the reviews. I enjoy more of the reviews when I've read the book
Uh-huh.
because I'll
Yeah.
often learn things. That's one thing I've always loved about your channel is I could read a book and then you always have something for me to think about that I hadn't thought about before.
Hmm.
And those are the types of videos I enjoy most when I've read a book and then I watch a whole bunch of different reviews and see people talk about it and
Yeah.
their perspectives, even if we have different conclusions about different aspects of the book or enjoyment of the book. Just the dialogue and experiencing that, it's almost like a virtual book club.
Oh, it is. It's
No.
an international, worldwide book club with thousands and maybe millions. I don't know how many people are, you know, into Booktube, but millions for sure, right? I mean,
Yeah, I would think so.
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
because there are channels that are
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
huge. I mean, Murphy and Daniel they're 6-figure subscribers. Mike will be there at some point.
Very soon.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, there's a lot out there for sure. And I even see in the discords where, because a lot of the booktube I do follow because I'm so into the fantasy genre right now, is a lot of the fantasy booktubers, but I see
Yeah.
in the group more people posting different content creators that have different perspectives. Whether it's like translated fiction or literary fiction, and I enjoy just stumbling upon those people
Yeah.
that have different focus as well, because I do like to, even though I'm reading a lot of fantasy right now, I do like to see the other perspectives of literary fiction or
Yeah.
science fiction or whatever it may be.
Yeah. I think there are even, and I don't know what they are because I very much focus on fantasy, but there are booktubers who even are in the millions of subscribers, I believe.
Probably, I
The
would imagine.
low, very low millions, I think,
Yeah, yeah,
or close to a million. I think that's about as big as you get. We're not video game channels here.
yeah.
So, but I think, and I do not at all keep track of numbers. I'm not a numbers person, but I have a sense that booktube is growing, that it's becoming more and more of a thing, and that the publishing industry should be taking more notice of booktube. I believe. I think that it's going to be increasing influence on what people pick up.
Oh,
Um,
I agree. I mean, when they say influencer, it's true because
mhm.
so much of my TBR, which is ridiculous right now, I have a spreadsheet. It's probably 500 books, and that's not an
Oh my
exaggeration.
goodness. Okay.
But my TBR is very much fueled by BookTube. When I see someone that I'm used to watching, especially, and when they show such joy about a book or a book series, I add it to the list.
Yeah.
And it's certainly, I'm sure the success of certain books like Legends and Lattes is one that I think about.
Uh-huh.
I guarantee that, Petrick and everybody else that discovered it early and kind of got a buzz about it is one reason why that's went from self pub to traditional pub.
Definitely.
So yeah, I think
Definitely.
the big five should probably definitely take note because it is definitely a thing because so much.
I'm surprised they haven't done more, honestly, to connect. Now, there are a few authors who have been ahead of the curve, like Brandon Sanderson, obviously, is the biggest, who has his
Yeah.
own channel and all of that. But there are others, and I think it's going to be more and more of a thing. But
Yeah, I agree.
what do I know? You know, I don't follow numbers, but I get this sense that Booktube is going to be a growing force in the world of books and bookmaking and all of that. It's already a big force, but
Yeah.
I just think it's going to be bigger even. And that's a good thing in my book, because
Yeah.
this is a wonderful community to be part of, and and there can be a bit of a bubble, you know, but as we get bigger, that, you know, the bubble gets bigger too, I guess, right?
Yeah,
So
sure.
hopefully you get plenty of diversity and lots of different voices, and all kinds of attention given to, and this goes hand in hand too, I think, with the exciting rise of self-publishing and different avenues toward publication. It's just much more viable now to market a
Yeah.
book, whether it's traditional or self-published. So
Yeah. And I was really impressed. I'm making an effort to try to read a lot more self-pub this year,
yeah,
simply because what I read last year was fantastic.
yeah,
I read three self-pub authors last year. I read A.R. Witham, I read Tiago Abdallah, and
I
I read
read
Ryan
Tiago.
Cahill.
Oh, right, I'm gonna
Three for
read Ryan
three.
Cahill.
I mean, all three of those authors just
Yeah,
presented just such great works that I said, if this is what self-publishing is, I need to get more on board with this.
yeah,
There's always
yeah.
some trepidation going in that the quality might not be there or whatever, but those three, that based on that, so I know it's a small sample size, just incredibly impressed
Well,
with
those are good ones from everything I've heard. AR Witham, I haven't read yet. I haven't read Ryan Cahill yet, but I hear wonderful things, and I will be reading both. As far as I think he pronounces it Thiago, because in Brazil they pronounce it
Okay.
Thiago, I'm told.
Oh, good
So
to know.
yeah, he's actually going to be a guest on Dear Dr. Fantasy pretty
Oh,
soon.
excellent. Yeah.
So I'll confirm that pronunciation when I talk to him. But I think it's Thiago. But anyway, yeah, he's I read his book fairly recently, and you know, there's just a lot of great self-published authors out there.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's exciting, and you know,
And I
book.
do like how authors, and like you said, Sanderson was probably first, but I
Yeah,
do like how authors are starting to embrace just the interaction with it more.
yeah,
And I think that's a great thing for everybody
yeah.
involved.
Oh, I so agree.
I
Yeah,
think it helps the authors quite a bit too when they see that they're more accessible or whatever,
yeah,
for people to just to find their work. You know, I think for a while, only if you had Daniel Green type numbers would an author come onto your show. But I think nowadays that's not the case. I think a lot of authors will go on to a lot of other platforms that are not necessarily, you know, the 500,000 subscribers, or I don't know what his numbers are, but I think that's a great thing, because I know for me, there's certain authors that went on my list simply because I saw them on Booktube and thought, wow, that person seems really cool. I want to read what they're writing.
yeah.
So
Oh my goodness, you're so right. I mean, Joe Abercrombie, of course, he's talked to Daniel Green and Murphy Napier and Mike as well, but he's also talked to, you know, the Gwynn brothers on their channel. You know,
yeah,
so, and they're going to be growing. They're at over 5,000 now, I think, and I
yeah, I think
expect their
so.
channel to get a lot bigger.
Yeah,
But
and Will branched out. Will has his own channel now
Will
too.
has his own
So
channel
yeah,
now as well. So yeah, they're going to be booming. But yeah, I've been very fortunate to have many opportunities to talk with Stephen Erickson and also Ian Esselmont, the Malazan authors, Jenny
mhm,
Wirtz recently. And
yeah,
I agree with you. It's just such a tremendous opportunity to speak with these people, to be able to hear their thoughts directly, to be able to ask them questions. And all three of those authors have been so gracious
yeah,
in that. And I think it depends on the author. Maybe some are less comfortable coming and talking to
sure,
people, and you know, that's fine. You know, not everyone is comfortable talking on a video and
yeah,
having thousands of people watch it.
sure.
But those people have been, you know, very accessible in that sense. And I think that we've all benefited so much from those conversations.
Oh, for sure. I mean, the first, I can only watch maybe 10 or 20 minutes of it. The first time you had Janny on, it was on your channel, and it was on
To
the
Ride Hell's Chasm.
Rise
Yeah.
Hell Chasm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was spoiler free before it was spoiler. So I watched the spoiler free part, and
Yeah.
literally that little bit of just hearing her talk about her work and her process and her experience, I added everything she wrote to my TBR.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was just immediately, I want to read more of what she's talking about. And I think,
Yep. We also had a live stream with her, and Jimmy and Joanna and AP were there, and we were talking about our read of the Wars of Light and Shadow. And that's it. That whole conversation is spoiler free.
okay.
But so it's a setup for the read along, which still hasn't really quite gotten underway. I read Curse of the Mistwraith some months back and loved it. But that it's really Jenny's the star of that
Yeah.
of that discussion, and just she is so brilliant and so insightful, and so if you want to hear her talk and be dazzled by her insights, that video I think is fantastic.
I'll definitely check that out.
It was a live stream, so
Okay.
yeah, it'll be under they separated the live from the rest of the videos nowadays on people's channels, but it's there. So
yeah, I know the one thing, just as a musician, the one thing I never tire of, it doesn't matter what kind of art someone produces, I always like hearing them talk about their craft, whether it's an author or a musician or a visual artist or whatever they may be. I always enjoy that. So hearing authors talk about how they do what they do, what influences they have, it's something, a topic I never tire of hearing about.
Yeah, I'm sure. Are there any fantasy books that you think include music in a really compelling way, like that you find to be very convincing? Like I like what Patrick Rothfuss does in The Name of the Wind, for example.
I haven't read that yet.
Okay.
That's on the list. That's one that's been on and off the TBR just because he's taken a long break in the series.
Yeah.
But what I've convinced myself at this point is I will read Name of the Wind, but I won't read the second book until the third book's out. So I'll kind of treat it as a standalone because I've heard that it can kind of function that way. Maybe. Maybe not.
I mean, I would never call it a standalone myself, but I would also say read it because it's, in my opinion, a beautifully written book in many respects. And one of the most compelling aspects of it is his presentation, not on a technical level, but just on an emotional level.
Yeah.
His presentation of music is beautiful.
Yeah.
In The Name of the Wind. So I would say go for it,
Okay. Well, I'd say one aspect, one passage, and I can't really say too much about it, but in Fool's Quest, Robin Hobb, which is the penultimate book of the entire realm of the Elderlings, there's a chapter that, quite frankly, is maybe the most beautiful chapter I've read anywhere. I bawled my eyes out and then read it again. And there's an aspect in that chapter that is a musical aspect. And I'll be honest, the first time through, I was getting nervous when I saw that there was going to be a musical aspect, because
the music critic comes out. Yeah.
Yeah. Because as a musician, I think most authors don't get it right. And I should have trusted Hobb, as Derry would say, trust in Hobb.
Derry would say that.
And it was perfect. It was the best depiction of music I've seen on print.
Wow.
So that was one part of one book, but as for most of the time, I think they don't get it right.
Okay.
And
from a technical point of view,
I think I think it's just the lack of knowledge. And I think it's one of those things that unless you are a musician who performs music, it's hard to explain it. It's just like a lot of authors talk about a lot of authors will have writers or authors as the author stand-in as a character. I know Stephen King does that a lot. Yeah. So when Stephen King is talking about an author writing, he knows exactly what that's all about.
Right.
That's something that I wouldn't know. But if Stephen King went and tried to talk about the craft of a musician and what that's like, maybe because he's Stephen King, he could pull it off. But in all likelihood, he might have some misses. And for me,
That's the trouble with being an author, is you have to pretend to be an expert in so many realms, you know. So, and sometimes they are, like Jenny Wirtz is an equestrian. I mean, she knows everything about horses. So when she
yeah,
talks about horses in her books, there's this level of authenticity that is just so cool. Or
yeah,
Steven Erickson is a fencer, you know, so he knows about sword play. And when he describes a
yeah,
duel, he knows what he's talking about. But most of the time when we're talking about fencing or sword fights or sailing or music or what have you, we're pretty much making it up,
yeah,
right? When we're
yeah.
writing, right? So it's a tough thing to, and then, you know, you worry about, oh, I have this scene in my book where they're sailing and I know somebody who actually sails is going to pick it to pieces, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But yeah, it's tough. And for me, it's just, it only takes a little thing and it'll take me out of the story, unfortunately.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Just because, yeah, the analytical side of what I do, it's that part of the brain turns on and it's hard to turn that off. But
Okay.
yeah, I feel for authors. I always think the toughest job for an author is those that are authors of historical fiction.
Oh yeah, that would be tough. Yeah. Because
Because
there you have to get it right because people are looking
yes,
for those little, oh no, you know, actually this is how
exactly.
these characters would have dressed. They wouldn't have worn the belt this way, you know.
Yes, exactly. I thought of that, and
Yeah.
that's got to be so challenging. But I think in general, I mean, writing's hard enough, but that I think that specific lens is probably the hardest, has to be because of that, because you can prove, oh well, that's not right, but then you just say it's fiction, so
Yeah, in
go with
fantasy, the
it.
advantage is, well, in my world, they wear the belt that way.
There
So
you go. It's my world.
I made it up. So
Yeah.
there. So yeah, that's the difference. Well, I do, if you ever end up reading the books that I'm publishing, I
Oh,
do have
I'm pre-ordering, so
I
yeah.
do have some music in there, so now I'm a little
Okay.
nervous. I do have a bard.
Okay.
In Old English, a bard was called a shaper. Um,
Okay.
or shop is the word in Old English, which a lot of people mispronounce as scop because it's written SCOP, but the SC in Old English is a sh sound, so it's shop,
Okay.
which means shaper essentially.
Yeah.
And I have a shaper character. I have a character later in the trilogy who sings.
Hmm.
So I've got a couple musicians in there.
Yeah.
I will be curious to hear you pick apart my. I do have a level. I think a level of authenticity when I describe the harp, at least, because I did some.
Hmm.
You know, I'm a an Old English person, so I did have some knowledge about how they put together their harps and stuff.
Yeah.
So that's in there. But
Well, I do love how, and authors do this. They put in what they love in their background, and so much of
yeah,
their books are themselves.
what
I've
they
watched enough of
research.
those Joe Abercrombie videos where interviews where, like, the book he's working on now, he was doing all this research, and it just sounded fascinating that
Yeah,
reading dozens upon dozens of books to try to just get that firmly entrenched. And
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's there's a risk too, though. I think with that, and there's a temptation. I think if you've done a ton of research into something, to overdo how much you include it in your book. You have to know, and it's tricky. How much of this should I actually put in here? How much will be, if I overdo it, showing the reader how much I know now about, or at least superficially,
yeah.
this particular realm. So I'll give an example of a book that I actually love, but I feel like there was a little too much. I mentioned this recently somewhere else, but so Scott Lynch's the second book in the Gentleman Bastard sequence, which I love. The three books are brilliant, in my opinion. Lives of Locke Lamore is awesome. I love the other books too, but the second book, Red Seas Under Red Skies, is a lot of there are a lot of nautical sections in there. And there were times when I felt like, oh, Scott Lynch, okay, I see that you did all this research. I know you've learned all these terms. Maybe you're even a sailor. I don't know, but this is just way too much
Too
information
much.
for me, you know.
Yeah.
And he did it in a way that was kind of clever because it was a character learning the ropes, literally.
Yeah.
Um, but it was just too much, you know,
Yeah.
for me anyway. Maybe other people will disagree and say, oh no, I love learning about sailing in there, but I wasn't
Yeah.
reading the book to learn about sailing, you know, so.
It's one of those, I think sometimes authors do that. They get maybe just a little over eager to
Yeah,
share sometimes what they
yeah.
love. I mean, that's actually kind of tangentially related to one of the criticisms that I have of Sanderson. I love Sanderson, but
Mhm.
sometimes he gets so excited about his magic system.
Oh my goodness.
He
Yeah.
just keeps telling you about it, keeps telling you about it. And I just want to say, Brandon, I got it the first 10 times. I understand it. You didn't need to tell me the 11th time how it works. I
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah.
But it comes from an enthusiasm. So I guess a
Yeah.
lot of times we can forgive it as readers because we know the author's just really into that. But
And
yeah,
that's
it
one
can
reason
feel
I haven't actually read Rhythm of War yet, because I've heard people talk about, okay, thank you for telling us all about fabrioles and how they're made and everything else. And
yeah.
do I want to get into that? Yeah.
I that's one of my lower rated Sanderson books because
Okay.
of the plotting, because I did feel like at times there was so much about the magic. I felt like I was reading a textbook. And some people love that because one
Yeah.
character starts doing experiments on Stormlight, and I'm like, okay, can we get through this to something else? But I'm eagerly anticipating the fifth book. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
I mean,
Rhythm of
I
War
love the
was
first two books. The first two books
same.
were a lot of enjoyment. And then the third was good, but I thought it did drag a bit.
Yeah, I think both of those had plotting
Oathbringer.
issues. I think they were just a bit too long.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you know, the guy's doing something right, obviously.
Oh, he's
So
fantastic.
yeah. So he's doing very well. And some, like you say, some people really do love getting into the intricacies of the magic systems and
Yeah.
learning them alongside the character, right? That's, I think
Yeah.
it's kind of not really secret, but that's part of Sanderson's formula for success. At least from what I've read. I've only read the first three Mistborn books, the original Mistborn trilogy, and the first three Stormlight Archive books. And I feel like I picked up on the Sanderson pattern, which is there's this really cool magic system which you learn about in stages along with the main characters as they're learning it, right? And
Yeah.
that's part of the immersion. That's part of the fun of a Sanderson
Yes.
book, I think. I don't. Have you read Beyond and those?
I have. I've read everything Cosmere except for the newest, the
Okay.
secret novel #1. I haven't read that one
The
yet.
the secret books that he that are
Yeah.
coming out now. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that one. I have the ebook, but I have the physical copy coming sometime this month, whenever that is. But
Okay.
I mean, I've read everything in the Cosmere. My favorite is still the first Mistborn trilogy.
Uh-huh.
I do love the way that he had allomancy, the way it was
And
learning.
that's pretty intricate too. Yeah.
And it is, and that's, to this day, it's still my probably favorite hard magic system. I mean, I do prefer a soft magic system, but I think when it's done really well, I think anything when it's done really well, I'll probably enjoy it. And I thought he did it very well in that first trilogy.
Well, what he's so skilled at is making it part of the plot. And that makes
Yes.
it interesting. When it's not part of the plot, which may be what happened a little bit in Rhythm of War. I don't know if it's
Yeah.
extraneous and it's just, ooh, look at this. It's so cool. And it's
Yeah.
not moving the plot, then maybe that's where you get into danger. But if you weave it into the plot and you make it part of that process of discovery, then
Yeah.
it can be compelling.
Yeah. And I found that it was, especially in that first trilogy.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I know it is to be. I like soft magic systems better. I know I'm in the minority for a modern fantasy reader. It seems
I
like
don't know if
most.
you are. I mean, I'm the
Really?
same. I bet if we did a poll, and maybe I have a slightly skewed idea of this because of the books that I like, but I feel like there's a solid a number of us, at least half. I'm going with half. It's a split, right?
Yeah.
Maybe our viewers can comment. Do you prefer hard or soft? And probably the answer is, I just like one that's done well.
Yeah, that's the correct answer.
Yeah. But I feel like there are plenty of people who actually do prefer a little bit of mystery in their magic. They don't
Yeah.
want it presented as a science. That's another cool thing, by the way, about Name of the Wind is you have both. You have a hard
Oh,
magic system and you have a soft magic system in Name of the Wind. I
Interesting.
don't know of any other book that gives you both in the same
Hmm.
series. But you'll see if you read it, what I'm talking about. But it is, I don't want to spoil anything, but
Yeah.
it has both in there, and I
Interesting.
think handled very well in both
Yeah.
cases. Yeah.
Hmm.
So yeah, did I just move up Name of the Wind on your TBR a little, maybe?
It's unwieldy at this point. Well, actually, right now my physical TBR is very big, so I'm trying to knock all that out before I start
So maybe
adding.
it went from 499 to 480 or so. Yeah.
Yeah, it's in there.
Okay.
Someday. Well, I say someday. I mean, am I going to get through 500 books when it seems like it doesn't change every year? That's the problem. I read 100 books a year, and the TBR still has 500 books because I hear about a new book or a book series. You posted your Scott Baker review this morning,
Yeah.
and that one's on the list. So there's like 3 more books that weren't necessarily on the list before, and I've only read one this year. So the TBR is already growing.
Ouch.
So, I mean, it's a good problem to have, to know about a
That's a
lot.
kind of magic, isn't it? The ever replenishing TBR.
It really is. It just
Yeah.
it won't quit. It's a good problem to have, though.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, do you, other than obviously Realm of the Elderlings, which I am on, do you have any books you think that I would enjoy reading that you've read in the last? Because I finished Dark Tower, which we
Yeah.
haven't talked about yet, but
Yeah.
you're a Dark Tower junkie. We talked about Stephen
Yeah.
King. Let's
I
save
was
the recommendation question. Let's talk about Dark Tower for a bit here. Yeah.
I was so glad that you loved the ending.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I think I commented, and the one thing I was glad about that, because when that book came out, that's when I read it, because I think I read the last 4 when they came out. I think the first 3 I picked up, but the last 4 I read them when they were released. And
And there
I
was a
love
lot of there were a lot of upset fans, I gather.
Yes, and
Yeah.
I loved it. I loved the ending,
Yeah.
because, not to spoil anything, but the aspect of the ending that I loved most is that it made me think about the entire series more than probably any other book series I'd ever read.
Yeah. In a
And
very interesting light too. Yeah.
very interesting way. It just made me think so much about it. And for me, those are my favorite kind of books. I talked about on um my book awards, my best reread of the year was To Kill a Mockingbird. And
Oh,
the
okay.
thing about that book that I love so much is, months after I finish it, I keep thinking about Scouts. And I
Mm,
keep thinking about how the events in that book surely shaped her life. Now, I don't know how they shaped her life, but I know that they did. And I just wonder. And I love that about the great works of literature. And I consider Dark Tower there, because
yeah.
it still, to this day, I mean, I don't know when that book came out, 15 years ago,
Mm,
maybe.
mm,
I still think about that ending, and I think it makes me just think about what happens next.
yeah.
And I'm going to reread it next year
Oh,
probably,
you
but
are Dark Tower.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's about time for me to reread it. But I think about that, and that was my favorite aspect about that ending. So I'm glad that I'm seeing now a lot more people appreciate the ending,
Yeah.
because it seemed like it was almost a 3-1 against when I finished it, and I was in the minority of loving it.
Huh.
And it's nice to see people appreciating a lot more now.
Yeah. I mean, the seventh book, I had quite a few moments where I was in tears reading
Yes.
Dark Tower. It was a very compelling emotional read. And I thought the ending was just, as you say, I will think about that ending to the end of my days. And I
Yeah.
intend to read some more Stephen King, particularly anything that has bearing on the Dark Tower, which is, I guess, everything.
Yeah, everything to an extent. Actually, what I started rereading the important books before,
Yeah.
leading up to this one, that
Okay.
are more important for the Dark Tower. I
Yeah,
mean, obviously,
which ones would you have me read? So I obviously
so Salem's Lot obviously is
Salem's
the
Lot
big
is
one.
super obvious. I need to read
Yeah,
that. The
that's a big
Stand.
one. The Stand, yes, you will meet a character that and see them differently.
Okay.
It has a tangential connection, and
Hmm.
it is probably my second favorite Stephen King book of all time. So
Oh, wow.
that's a good
Okay.
one to read. There's a novella in the short story collection of Everything's Eventual that is, it's Roland, and it's
Is
just
that
a,
Little Sisters of Illyria?
yes,
Okay.
yes,
Yeah.
it's a great one with Roland.
Yeah.
What else is in there? The Talisman in Black House, which he co-wrote with Peter Straub, which I'll be
Okay.
reading those this year as part of that read through. Oh, and Insomnia. Insomnia is in many ways a Dark Tower book because it's got some strange events, and then there's a character in there that is also in the Dark Tower.
Insomnia. Okay.
Yeah.
Mike has
So
talked
I
about
think,
that.
yeah, I think those are the big ones. And then there's obviously little Easter eggs here and there. Well, Hearts in Atlantis, the first story from that one has a tie-in as well.
Okay.
So, I mean, there's a lot that are kind of, I considered those the essential ones that I wanted to reread before rereading The Dark Tower.
Okay. A very popular Stephen King book is 1122.
That's my favorite, 63.
63.
Yeah.
Does that have any bearing on Dark Tower?
A little bit, but it's not quite as important. But that's a great one to read. That's actually probably my biggest video last year was my top 10 Stephen King ranking, and that one was number one. That's my favorite. It's the one criticism all of us have with King is he doesn't always write the best endings, and I think that was his most beautiful ending.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I love the ending of Dark Tower, but yeah.
Oh yeah, well, for sure. But he's the what is it? The architect and the gardener. He's a gardener.
Yeah.
So a lot of times the journey's better than the destination, but that destination was just chef's kiss.
112263.
Yeah, just absolutely beautiful. And I also read it. It's set. I mean, you probably know it's about the Kennedy assassination in a way.
Yeah. Well, the date, I mean, pretty much tells me.
Yeah. So I lived in Dallas at the time when I was reading.
Oh, really?
So it helped that living in Dallas, I knew so much I could visualize every aspect of it, because every time someone would visit me in Dallas, they always wanted to see the school book depository and go to the JFK museum and all of that. So I knew that area, you have to go stand on the grassy knoll, all of that kind of thing.
Yep.
But even just when they were talking about different parts of town and different things, I knew exactly what they were talking about. And I'm sure that aided in my enjoyment of the book, but I love that book.
Yeah. I've been to Dallas myself. Yeah. So, wow, that's really cool. Okay. Where do you rate The Stand? And if you don't mind telling me, in that top
Stand
10?
was number 3.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, it was number 2. And actually Wizard and Glass was number 4.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah. The first straight up Dark Tower book was so obviously the Wizard and Glass is your favorite of Dark Tower.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I love that. I mean, it was maybe the most, can you say any of it's traditional? The most traditional fantasy element of the 7.
I mean, Dark Tower is so hard to categorize. But
I just loved that was the book that solidified for me Roland being one of my favorite literary characters. Yep. Just seeing that backstory, seeing the original quartet, and I just love that book. That was a book that's a big chunker, and I remember when that came out, I read it in like 4 days because I couldn't put it down. I just couldn't get enough of that book. And it also had the coming of age element that King is just so fantastic at, and I adore that book. So that was kind of my Mount Rushmore of Stephen King books, were those 4.
Wow, this is okay. Well, Wizard and Glass, I've read that one, and like you, what I've said is I felt like in the first 3 Dark Tower books that I was in awe of Roland, that he had become an iconic character for me. But Wizard and Glass was the book that made me love Roland.
Yeah.
It was just such a beautiful and, obviously without any spoilers, tragic read, tragic story. But not just the story within the story itself was being so beautiful, but it was also the reaction of the quartet, of the present to the story, and their reconfigured relationship with Roland as a result of this revelation about his past. So
yeah, I think their connection helped our connection as readers.
Exactly. Yeah.
And he's definitely beyond an iconic character. That's one of my top 10s. I'll do top 10 literary characters. I'm sure he's going to be on
Roland's going to be on the list. Yeah,
for sure.
He would be on my list, definitely. top 10 characters if I ever did it, that video. Yeah, Roland, I don't know. I hate making these top 10 lists though, because it's just so,
I think most of them, I started just the one day I was just looking at the bookshelf and thinking about a category. I think I was thinking science fiction. And I went through the list of like, okay, I have 20 that I just thought are top 10 choices. How will I nail that down?
Yep, that's going to be tough
Yeah.
math right there.
Characters will be even tougher.
So do you ever consider just pulling a Durfee and making it my top 30 science fiction?
I could do it that way, but yeah. Or like Matt on Matt's fantasy book reviews, he did his top 100.
Top 100. Yeah, he's gone through his 100.
Which is crazy. But that aided my TBR a little bit when I saw out of that 100 who was in his top 10. It certainly influenced me a little bit as far as what
well, he's another Malazan fan. He's a Malazan fan, so
he is. I think Cripple God was number 1, but actually Durfee's books were so high that I bought all of those. I have those in the physical TBR, so I want to read.
I need to read those too. Yeah,
because Matt just raves about them. I know Petrik's raved about them as well, and it just seems
Mike has actually said some very, very highly complimentary things too. So
yeah, and I think Madison's reading them right now, or maybe she's just finished them. But it just seems like the people that read them love them, and I love the guy's channel, so I wanted to support him. So when the new book came out, I bought all 3 that week to try to boost those numbers for him, because I know first week numbers are important for authors. And
oh my goodness,
he's just such a personality on Booktube. I just love watching his his low tech content is like some of the best out there, because it's just so raw and it's him. And he's definitely a must watch in our community as far as I'm concerned.
Oh my goodness, yeah. And I always feel a connection with him when he's doing something wrong with the technology or something like that.
I'll edit that out, right?
Yeah. My goodness. Yeah. I mean, he speaks for some of us of a certain age, I think, when it comes to how comfortable or not we are with the technical aspects of video making. So, yeah, awesome. So let's get back to that recommendation thing. So books that you think, it doesn't have to be fantasy either, by the way.
So there's 2 books I want to recommend, literary fiction.
Okay.
That I don't think I've ever talked about on my channel, but are 2 of my top. One of them is probably my favorite book of all time, and the other is probably a top 15. I say top 15 because I don't want to keep saying, "Oh, this is in my top 10." And then
I know I say top 10, and I've got like 50 things in my top 10.
Exactly. But I don't know if you've read Kate Atkinson.
No.
I think she's Irish. She's definitely lives across the pond, and she's a literary fiction writer. And well, she wrote a book called Life After Life, which is a book that I love. And it's about a woman, and each chapter tells her entire story, different ways her life could have played out. So in one chapter, her mother dies in childbirth. She's never born.
Oh.
Another chapter, she lives 5 years, childhood accident, she dies. Another chapter, maybe she lives 3 days. And of course, some of these chapters go on her entire scope of her life. And what's funny is when I found out after I read the book that what Atkinson wanted to do is she wanted to tell a story about the German Blitz of London. And this is what she came up with, because when we get her whole story, she's in the German Blitz of London, and we have different aspects of that. But what's so brilliant about the book is the longer periods of time. When you see a certain event play out differently, how it changed the entire trajectory of her life. And it's just so thought-provoking, because I think about that. I think about the big decisions in my life. What if I went to this grad school versus this one? Or what if I went to this undergrad versus this one, took this job? You always think about those big ones, but even just thinking about maybe the little decisions, how they impact the trajectory of our life. And I found it so thought-provoking, and it's brilliant. So Life After Life is the first one, but the second one is a book called A God in Ruins.
Okay.
And it's not a sequel, but she calls it a companion novel, because what this one is about, it's about the main character from Life After Life. Her name's Ursula, and it's about her brother Teddy.
Okay.
And this one is about the other side of that same war, and it's about the Allied strategic bombing of Germany during World War II.
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
Teddy's a fighter pilot, and this one's more straightforward.
Okay.
But it also it follows Teddy during the war, and then it follows a timeline of his, I think it's his daughter 30 years later, and then his granddaughter 60 years later. So you
Okay.
have these three timelines that are telling these different stories. And it's more straightforward until it isn't. And there's a point about 500 pages in where Atkinson reveals what the book's really about.
Wow.
And
Huh.
I felt like someone punched me. I couldn't breathe. I started hyperventilating. I'm kind of getting the emotions right now.
Wow.
The single most impactful thing I've ever read.
Wow.
Maybe the only contender is the end of Realm of the Elderlings. And so I gave that spiel to a friend of mine, real life friend that reads a lot. And I told him about those books, and he said, great, they sound fantastic. I want to read those. So a couple weeks later, he sent me a text, and he said, I'm on page 5XX of A God in Ruins, which the big reveal. And he said, I can't stop sobbing.
Wow.
So powerful. It's still one of those moments in literature that makes you realize this is why I love to read.
So you would recommend reading the other one first, though?
I would, just because I think they're great. And I think if you read them the other way, it might not have the same impact. But you could even read them separately, or just read one. But
okay, can you repeat the name of the author and the titles for all the people who are trying to write this down right now?
Yes, Kate Atkinson.
Yeah.
And the first book I talked about is Life After Life. And the second one is A God in Ruins.
Okay. Everybody hear that?
Yeah, those are two books that I just love. And I look forward to talking about maybe both of them, at least one of them, on one of those top 10 lists that I do later this year, because those were just such impactful. We talk about impactful reads and memorable reads.
Yeah.
And it's one of those, I plan on rereading a lot of things. I hope that when I read A God in Ruins, that the impact is the same, knowing what it's all about. Hopefully it'll be enriched by that experience. But yeah, so not fantasy recommendations, but those are certainly two books that just really touched me, that I've read in the last 5 years or so.
Sounds like it. Wow. Tremendous. Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
My pleasure. I hope that if you get to them, you love them as much as I did.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, just tremendous. Well, Josh, this has been a wonderful time for me, and I am so happy that I got the chance. Now, it is our first time, just you and me chatting. So
yeah, this was
it's
great.
Our third time being able to chat,
Yep.
but first time with just the two of us, and I hope it will certainly not be the last. I want to encourage everyone to check out Red Fury Books, and I have a feeling, Josh, that your channel, I know you said it's not, about the numbers necessarily, but I have a feeling you're going to have some growth in your channel in that's my prediction. 2023 is going to be a good year for Red Fury Books. So I hope everyone will go check out the channel and see what thoughtful and not just content with a lot of breadth, but with a lot of depth. And I think it's wonderful to have you as a friend here in this community as well. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, likewise, was happy to be on this. I always enjoy watching these, so it's been fun to just chat one-on-one and just talk about great literature and music and everything else we talked about today. So
yeah, all the good stuff, the good stuff, my friend. All right, well, everybody, thank you so much for watching, and until next time.